1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I've gotten started a little late today, only mainly because of computer snafus. I have like two or three, I'm not good with that sort of thing. I've got several accounts and I've got, the whole thing is kind of a mess. But either way, here we go. We're recording and I'm welcoming you aboard to the show. You certainly can call in. I'm discussing any and all issues. It's an open lines program, this segment. And to call in, you can dial 617-396-4958, 617-396-4958. Let's keep the conversation within the bounds of propriety. And I define those bounds loosely because I believe in free speech, and I'm going to trust people to not get me in trouble. Do we have free speech right now in this country? Have we ever had free speech in this country or in this world? Look, we're all, in a sense, we all censor ourselves. And to a certain degree, any nation state is involved in some censorship, in that you don't want to have people inciting violence and overthrow of the government and, horrendous slander and libel against entire groups of people, particularly based on ethnic and racial origins. I mean, that is wrong. And I certainly do think that individuals ought to censor that. We have a thing in this country that emanates from natural law called libel and slander that can make such speech criminal. And as a nation, we generally adhere to certain basic standards of speech. I remember a while ago talking to who was at the time a very well-known reporter at the Boston Globe, who happened to be not a personal friend of mine, but he was a member of my synagogue. Let's put it that way. He's retired now. Very well known. I'm not going to mention his name because it was a private conversation. And we were talking about how the media works. We were talking about the liberal bias of the media, which he didn't deny. But one of the points that he made at the time, which left an impression on me, is that generally speaking, the media takes a certain level of responsibility with regard to the coverage of their own country, in that there are certain unspoken codes of patriotism. And by the way, this is a man of the left. I mean, a classic, liberal left-leaning establishment figure. And that all media, left, right, and center, just like in a sense all individuals, adhere to this unspoken code, that we maintain a certain standard by which we don't want to see our nation torn down. We don't want to say things publicly that could lead to pain and suffering on the part of our fellow citizens. We don't want to unduly slander our nation. Because we all have a stake in the success of our nation. And that includes people of the far left, even, and far right. And as such, we want to preserve the basic institutions that make up our nation. What liberals call the basic institutions of democracy, what I would call basic Republican institutions. And so in that vein, and for that reason, we all not only censor, but we expect our media to censor as well. And so I understand those standards. My main criticism, however, is that in the present atmosphere, those standards have become politicized, in that the means of communication, the high ground of communication, the major vehicles of communication in the world today, which is no longer just the press, the press media, which is of which the main figure in that is the New York Times, and no longer the television media, of which the big three are still the main players: CBS, NBC, and ABC, and to a certain extent, Fox News and Fox and NPR. But and the main publishing houses, which decide which books to publish, but also big tech, what I'm doing right now, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and all of the various subscribers to this program, that while they have a responsibility to ensure that they are operating within the parameters of patriotism, the question is, have they overstepped that, and are they engaging in censorship of speech? I would suggest that they're engaging in censorship of free speech that is entirely within the bounds of legitimate criticism and commentary, and that they are doing so as a means to support a particular point of view, and that particular point of view is liberal left. The liberal left point of view has become the predominant view in our establishment media, in our means of communication, in our mode of communication. It has become the median. It has become the center of a symmetry by which we establish the foundations of our ability to speak and write and think and know. And so they are skewed in such a way that they decide what we know and don't know. They decide what we see and don't see. They decide what we hear and don't hear. And in that process, they can greatly influence what we know to be true and what we base our opinions and our actions on. And I would suggest that it has gone well beyond a question of basic patriotism, which I do think they observe. I'm not criticizing that. It has gone into a politicized speech pattern that promotes a particular point of view. And, you know, the refrain that I hear from those who support this movement is, well, I mean, these are companies, are private companies. Don't they have a right to do that? Aren't I a capitalist? Don't I support private companies in their right to decide what is said and not said? And it's a very difficult question to answer. Of course, I'm a capitalist. You know, I believe that in the free market, I believe that individuals and groups, which are companies, ought to be able to define how they function to a very high degree. I will, however, suggest that, and in fact, this is going to be the topic of a new book I'm going to be writing, my third installment in an ongoing series of short books, The American System, that the American system is not completely 100% free market. Never has been, never will be. And in fact, such a paradigm is not real any more than communism is real. These are made up things. These are not, you know, human being. We're not, like, to say that we have absolute free market is to say that every single person is like sovereign literally as their own empire. We're sovereign under God, but we also recognize a vehicle to protect that sovereignty, and that vehicle is the state, which serves us. But the point I'm making is that you can't have both. You can't have it both ways. You can't have complete sovereignty and also have a state. You know, we're not all otherwise it's a return to a radical form of feudalism. So we have to have a state apparatus that conducts some basic functions of protecting, preserving, advancing, and defending at times our sovereign rights as citizens and our ability to conduct our own lives and determine our own futures. But within that is a partnership. And so when you have private entities like big tech and the big print media still and the radio and TV media skewing everything in a certain direction in order to bring about a certain result in terms of opinion, then it's no longer free market because they control the market. That's called monopoly. That's called collusion. Now, I'm not saying that they consciously and wittingly collude. I'm saying that they don't need to do it that way because they get their cue from the establishment and they follow that cue. In the case of the print media, traditionally, certainly for the past maybe 100 years, that cue came from the New York Times. The New York Times is a newspaper that is far outstrips its actual subscription, its actual influence, literal influence in New York and in the New Jersey, Connecticut, the tri-state area. They determine or have determined the general trend nationally of what is going to be written about, what is going to be reported, and what isn't. Somebody once said, "Oh, don't I think the New York Times, is crafting opinion?" Yeah, they are, but not necessarily by what they write. It's more what they don't write. It's more what they decide to leave off. Can you imagine that kind of power? I mean, you have this one newsroom in New York. You have one editor or a staff of editors, and they sit down every day and decide what we're going to read about and what we're not going to read about, what their investigators are going to investigate and what they're not going to investigate. It's a gigantic system of censorship. It's a gigantic system of filtering out that which we know and don't know. They decide the standards by which we know it. We saw those standards go right in the toilet, for example, during the Trump administration, when all of a sudden the conventional journalistic standards of reporting a story, which were that you should have at least two or more sources, and that those sources had to be credible, and hopefully at least one of them public. Instead, they reduced it to having one anonymous source because they wanted to destroy Trump. They wanted to attack Trump. So they'd come out with one anonymous source and run a full story that would try to smear Trump. I mean, they did this even recently during the so-called impeachment, the phony impeachment, where they went out with stories that turned out to be false. I mean, I'll give you one example. Senator Bill Lee, one of the House managers who presented the case for conviction, quoted an article in the New York Times which said that President Trump had called Lee and had said, "I want you to do something with the protesters." There was some kind of a cockamamie story about this. Turned out to be untrue. The next day, the New York Times retracted it, but they did so in small print. They buried that so they could at least maintain some credibility. But obviously the damage had been done, and that this piece of evidence was used by the House manager. And he read it, the lawyer, and I think it was Raskin, and he actually read this right into his case right when Senator Lee was standing there. And Senator Lee objected strenuously and in anger. That didn't happen. I never said that. That was retracted. The point I'm making is that this was exactly what President Trump talked about when he talked about fake news. The mainstream media is manufacturing stories because they have an agenda. They have a particular point of view that transcends basic understanding of reporting standards, basic understanding of patriotism, as my friend at the Boston Globe told me. They wanted to stop Trump. They would never explain why they wanted to stop Trump, which is actually a very interesting story. We should be able to write about that. I've written a couple of books about it, which are being completely censored and ignored. And my point in terms of bringing this up is that, yes, the New York Times is a private corporation. And yes, they have a right to do some level of vetting. And yes, they have a right to an editorial opinion. But when the founding fathers recognized in the Constitution the right to free speech, free press, free religion, redress of grievances, and the right to assemble, they were codifying what they viewed as natural law, that this is an inherent right, a God-given right. We are endowed by our Creator, Jefferson said, God, with certain inalienable rights. And that in order to achieve the proper distribution of those rights in a free society, which is a society where you do have people and organizations that become extremely successful, and rightfully, that they may collude or they may censor or they may, monopolize opinion, that you have to have a means to distribute that kind of power so that no one group or one point of view or one opinion becomes the dominant opinion. That was the principle that the founding generation put in place when they developed the concept of a balance of powers. Now, the concept of a balance of powers, which is the very essence of our constitutional system and the very language of our Constitution, what it did in the formal sense was it divided governing powers between three federal bodies: the executive, or the president, the legislative, or the Congress, and the judiciary, or the courts and the Supreme Court. Each branch had its own lane, so to speak, and its own areas of responsibility. And each branch was set up to compete with and check and balance the other two branches. And so you had parity. You don't have perfection. You don't have an end to corruption, but with the understanding that government power is corruption and that it is a fearful power, the founding generation believed in their brilliance that by dividing up powers and setting powers against each other, you would at least have some running possibility that the people, the sovereign citizen under God, would be able to continue in a free context. And that this balance was not just on the federal level. The states, the sovereign states, also imitated this by setting up their own three branches of government: the governor, the state legislature, the state court system. And that was further balanced by the local county or community, which also had various permutations of such balance. You had like a mayor, a city council, and a local judge. You had, in other words, and that all of these powers would balance the other. The state existence of the sovereign state balances the federal. The existence of the local city and town balances the state, and so forth. It goes right through the entire system, with the whole idea that by balancing these powers, the ultimate power would more likely, not perfectly, but more likely, reside with the citizen, who would then be free to function and determine the course of their own life and their own destiny. And that includes the private sector. The private sector has to be balanced by the interests of the community. It's that simple. The left loves to talk about this. Of course, they don't mean it. They mean it situationally, because they do believe in total authoritarian power and controlled by the so-called, enlightened elite. But they're giving language, at least, to a very American conception. And it's an American conception because that works because it's true. Because this is the best system. This is the biblical system. This is a system that Moses adopted in Sinai when he was counseled by his father-in-law, Jethro, to set up a council of elders. In other words, that Jethro, Jethro said to him, you're taking on too much responsibility on your shoulders. You can't do everything. You have to set up a council of elders to adjudicate, to try to help solve problems as they come up, injustices as they occur in society, and they always will occur normally. That at that time, God also separated a priestly caste under Moses' brother Aaron. They would handle the ritual elements, the worship, the formalized worship of God, and that they would be ascribed to very particular tasks in that regard. Both of these instances represented a separation of power. And as a Jew, I believe that this is the word of God, and that God is pointing us in the direction of a separation of power. On the world stage, we have a separation of power by the maintenance of separate sovereign nations. This is also biblical. When Nimrod tried to overthrow God in heaven by building the Tower of Babel, which, by the way, has the new Amazon headquarters. I don't know if anyone's seen this. It looks a little bit like the Tower of Babel. Okay, enough said on that. But when Nimrod tried to build that tower, he wanted to reach into the heavens, apprehend God, seize God, put him in chains, and put him in prison. In other words, he wanted to take over that power. He didn't want to have the balance of power between God and man, between God, the creator of the universe, the giver of the law, and the created, the image of God, the imperfect man. And so what we're talking about, not only from a biblical standpoint, but from a natural standpoint, is the normal order of things. I mean, this is how we balance our lives. This is what the Greeks called logos. By the way, speaking of which, Dr. E. Michael Jones is going to be my guest this Friday. And he wrote a book called Logos Rising, which is brilliant. And he talks about how logos, from a political and philosophical and theological standpoint, translated into an expression of recognizing God's order of the universe. And it's just a great piece. I don't agree with him on certain issues. We'll get into that. But the point is that on this issue, he's brilliant. And so we set up nation states, particularly the United States, because we are the ultimate flowering of this idea, where we maintain a separation of powers, we maintain a system of checks and balances, and that includes the private sector. I mean, a private company doesn't have a right to build a nuclear plant in your backyard. The people of that community have a say in it. And I would suggest in that vein that we ought to have a say in what is becoming more and more obvious, and that is an extreme imbalance in terms of the means of communication, how we communicate with each other, by people who have a particular point of view, who share that point of view with most, if not all, of the major players in the field of communication, and who have decided to suppress opposing views. The case study for this is the presidency of Donald Trump. This establishment, the media establishment, the print, radio, TV. Radio is a little more difficult to control because you got people like Rush Limbaugh. But for the most part, radio, certainly big tech, the Twitters, the Facebooks, the YouTubes, they didn't collude in the formal sense, I don't think, I have no idea, in terms of getting together and saying, oh, we're going to purge any opinions that support Trump. But they did it, kind of organically. They just knew that they had to stop Trump. The reasons they had to stop Trump, as I said, are very interesting, but we never quite got to that. I've talked about that. We could get into that. I don't know if I have time today. I am only bringing it up to illustrate a point here, which is that they decided from the minute he announced his candidacy that they were going to stop him. At the same time, they wanted to make a few bucks by talking about him, but they would balance that by trying to discredit him, mock him, delegitimize him in his presidency. It wasn't supposed to happen for them. And they did this. I mean, it's again, I mean, I'm not here to plug my newest book, Toward Fascist America, but I do cover this in my book. You can check it out. It's not expensive. In fact, I think it's still free on Amazon. Toward Fascist America. Just go check it out. All right, Charles Moscowitz. So they did this, and they did purge Trump, and now they're attacking us, and they're using censorship to do it. And all I'm saying here, and I think I'm going to wrap it up, is that we need to have a return to a level of balance. We need a system of checks and balances. Yes, they're private companies, but when they operate as monopolies, both formally and informally, we must stand up to that so we can keep a healthy, balanced, ordered society. We can't let one group, especially in the era of opinion, dominate. That would be like, I mean, in a way, I mean, the whole concept of a separation of church and state, which was not something in the Constitution. Jefferson basically wrote the famous letter to the Danbury Baptist Church in Connecticut saying that there was a hedge between the Constitution and religion, and he did so in order to ensure them that they were free to practice their religion. By the way, it's been mischaracterized by the enemies of religion ever since. But the idea is that we don't want to have a formal one religion that is officially recognized. That's something that was a reform. The founding fathers, a lot of them came to this country to get away from the authoritarian agenda of the Church of England under King James II and under Charles. They were rebelling against that. They were rebelling against the new model of Oliver Cromwell. A lot of people came to this country to get away from that and have their own religions. Yes, they set up state religions in the case of Massachusetts, but you'll notice that when Massachusetts established a state religion, which eventually the Puritans, which eventually became today the Congregationalists, people rebelled even here. They set up separate colonies. They set up, Connecticut and Rhode Island and New Hampshire. And then America went in the direction of not having a state religion, but having religion itself serving as a major influence, but not in the formal sense that people would have to adhere to one particular religion in a state. What I'm suggesting is that principle applies now to the way the media is conducting itself. That is the new religion, their point of view. And the fact that they're not codifying it as a state matter, that they're hiding behind the idea that they're private entities, that is the very definition of fascism. That is what I'm getting into in my book here, Toward Fascist America. That the fascist system is not one where the country, the government, formally controls the media. That's communism. That's Bolshevism. In a communist country, there is no separate media. The government is the media, flat out. They don't make any pretensions. In that way, communism is actually more honest in its evil, but it's more honest. In a communist country, there is no separate corporation. The government is the corporation. There is no pretensions or levels of private ownership. The government owns everything. There is no small business. The government is the business. There is no private religion. The government is the religion. That's what communism is. And it does it. I mean, it claims to do it for the better, for the good of people, right? The fascist system, on the other hand, is what Mussolini called the third way. And it's one that has the danger, and that certainly was the case in Nazi Germany, of viewing one way as based on people's biology and people's race, which is why, in a way, Nazism, not in a way, it is even more evil than communism. There's no question. But either way, what it does is it leaves in place a fig leaf by which the private sector continues, but it does so in partnership with the government openly. Now, in the case of Mussolini, it's a merge between a ruling oligarch headed by a dictator who has a personality cult, working hand in glove with select corporations that maintain monopoly power and decide what happens in that country. They're both the governing. It's like a junta, or it's not a junta. It's a dual government. It's a two houses. And in the case of fascist Italy, this was formalized. I mean, instead of having a Congress or a parliament, fascist Italy had a council of corporations. And that's exactly what it was. Certain corporations, which had monopoly power in their country and could decide how business was conducted, and who were working hand in glove with an oligarchic government headed by Mussolini. That is what fascism is. Now, is that what's happening in this country with big tech and big media in collusion with the new administration? The answer to that, I would suggest, is yes and no. No, it's not happening in such a formal sense. We still have a Congress. We don't have, we still have a level of freedom. They can't do this formally. But yes, in the de facto sense, it's happening because the big media, the means of communication, are working hand in glove with this government. They worked hand in glove in terms of deposing the legitimate administration of President Trump using all the tools at their disposal. And now they're working hand in glove to ensure that this new agenda goes forward. And all we can do is stand by and watch and identify it. We can't do anything that much about it right now. We can think about what we can do. And I certainly intend to examine that and talk about it to the best of my ability in the months and years ahead. But that is the situation as it stands right now. And that, I would suggest, my dear observers right now, is in essence fascism. And that's where we are. My station is being shadow banned, not because I have opinions that are unpatriotic, not because I support things that that would demonize any group of people based upon their ethnic background or their race, which I think is actually a legitimate form of censorship. We shouldn't allow that. But because of my political opinions, because I have had the temerity to support the administration of Donald Trump, because I have had the nerve to question the legitimacy of this recent election, which I think is a political question that should be and ought to be debated. And because now I am critical of elements of the there's a Freudian slip, the Biden administration. I'm not critical of everything they're doing. I'm critical when I'm critical. I consider myself to be in the loyal opposition. I'm not trying to overthrow the election, but I want to identify what I see as improprieties. Because if we don't, we're never going to have another free election. And for that reason, my opinion runs foul of this entity, this quote private entities that operate hand in glove. So, therefore, what's happening, and I've been told this by people who are in the know, is that I am being shadow banned on both YouTube and on TikTok. Now, I've been told by people on several occasions, not on TikTok, but on YouTube, that they subscribed to my station and then all of a sudden they did, without their knowing it, they were unsubscribed. Not that they didn't do it. They didn't actually go in and unsubscribe. It just happened somehow. They stopped getting my daily YouTubes, and all of a sudden they looked into it and they discovered that they had been unsubscribed. That's that's something that's been reported to me. It's been reported to me that the station has been shadow banned. Maybe I should be grateful, because if the station was any bigger, they'd probably just take me down totally. Maybe they will still. I don't know. Every day when I look at it, I wonder if I'm still going to be there. And same thing with TikTok. I mean, with TikTok, I reached a level of about 7,500 followers, and then all of a sudden everything came to a crashing stop. Now, I don't know if it's because my videos are bad. I mean, whatever. I think that it just, to me, it looks very suspicious that now I've been shadow banned by TikTok. I have been entered into the algorithm as something that needs to be hidden. And so I'm being censored there. And yeah, I mean, I'm just some poor schlub here in Boston. There's not much I can do about this, other than ask you, if you happen to be here, to please subscribe to my YouTube channel and please subscribe to my TikTok channel. That's the only thing I can do. I've been demonetized on YouTube. Frankly, I mean, as much as I love doing what I'm doing here, and I love the YouTube, I've interviewed and will be interviewing some amazing people. I wouldn't have minded this as being a business model for me. I don't deny that. I would have liked to have made some revenue from this. Why not? I'm working I spent a lot of time on this. I work on it. And YouTube for a while approved my station for monetization. I didn't make much. We're talking, 50 cents here, 75 cents there. But at least I felt like, okay, I'm building it. I can do this. Now I've been told that it's been demonetized because I didn't observe community standards. Now, again, they have a right to define community standards. I would simply suggest that their definition of community standards, which they don't tell you what that is, it's not because I said something that was slanderous or libelous toward any group of people. I mean, in other words, based on race or ethnic background, which I would understand. It's because of my political opinions. And so I'm shadow banned on YouTube and on TikTok. And I suppose that in this particular fascistic atmosphere, maybe I should just be grateful that I'm allowed to do this at all. I intend to do it every day, Monday through Friday, 12 noon to 1 and beyond. I intend to continue with my interviews. I am trying to figure out a way around this. I've set up a website, charlesmoscowitz.com. I'm setting up a shopping page where I'm going to put up various things, my books and other products, like Mike Lindell's My Pillow. Talk about censorship. And maybe I can get a small commission if people buy products from that site. Who knows? I'm trying to figure it out. I'm trying to figure out how to, survive in this business, how to do it in a sustainable way for myself and my family. And all I can say as I get ready to sign off is that we need to stick together. We need to continue to network. Those of us who have opposing opinion, those of us who are part of the loyal opposition. And we need to do so not only to help each other survive, but I would think actually almost setting up an alternative means of communication network as a way to bore within. We're doing a counter Fabian approach here. And to once again begin to make inroads and enter into what the founding generation envisioned and what is envisioned by the Lord God, and that is a genuine and free balance of powers, checks and balances, so that we all can, within the parameters of legitimacy, have our say, have our ability to influence our society, and by doing so, have a say in controlling our own lives and our own destinies, those of our families. And so, I just want to thank you for joining me today. I shall return. I've got a guest tomorrow that, who do I have coming up? I have an interesting guest tomorrow. Let me just take a peek here. And that would be, it's California Congresswoman Sarah Jacobs. She's talking about the fact that the House now wants to set up a, quote, truth commission. Sounds like something they set up after the Nazis. Ari Hoffman is coming on. He's a political analyst. He's going to talk about this. The associate editor and Seattle correspondent for the Post Millennial. He points out California Democrat Rep. Sarah Jacobs told CNN, Brian Stelter, oh God, what a character, that the United States needs a, quote, truth commission so that a, quote, common narrative can be set forth. Rep. Jacobs explained to Stelter that a truth commission could be one solution for sorting out the different conflicting political narratives in the U.S. Why do we need to have things sorted out? By having one official government narrative of history and political events. And all right, so this is tomorrow, 12 noon Eastern time. Be there or be square. Ari Hoffman, he's a he's a journalist. And, what they're trying to do, in other words, what she's saying is that Trump supporters, the MAGA supporters, us deplorables, whatever you want to call us, we are the enemy. They need to figure out how to edit us out. And believe me, I'm going to get into this. I didn't have time today, but I will. These executive orders that have been issued by this new regime and these debates before Congress, including gun confiscation, abortion, international funding of abortion, these things are moving us in a very Nazi-like authoritarian direction, I would suggest. And that we are not having, the thing that makes it worse for me, besides what they're doing, is that we're not going to be in a position where we can oppose it, where we can even comment on it. I'm afraid even mentioning it now, everything's going to get taken down. That's what's worrisome. They have a lockstep control over the high ground in terms of the media and means of communication. That is, again, the definition of fascism. So let's keep the faith. I shall forge forward. God willing, I shall be here tomorrow at 12 noon with my guest talking about this proposal by Sarah Jacobs. She's a congresswoman. This is not to be taken lightly. This is a representative in Congress. Believe me, they're sending out a trial balloon here. Truth Commission, okay? We'll be talking about it tomorrow at noon. So thank you for joining me, everyone. God bless you all. Please subscribe to TikTok and YouTube. Charles Moscowitz. My books are available at Amazon. Toweard Fascist America is my latest. And have a great afternoon, everybody. Thank you. Okay.